for not being able to join you guys in person. So here is how I have organized my thoughts and talk. First, I will argue using certain facts many of you know very well, all of you really know very well that I will use those facts to argue that Ethiopia is incompatible. The very idea of Ethiopian system, is incompatible with development in general, and have kept the Oromo in particular from reaching their productive potentials. I'll then discuss some of the main reasons for this argument that I am making, using my reading of the literature in development economics. Finally, I will propose a potential solution, a formula, if you will, that could produce win-win solutions for all that have a stake in the Ethiopian state. Let's ponder this question. Why are Oromos poor, largely undereducated, dying from preventable diseases and malnutrition in large numbers, migrating, again, in huge numbers to other seemingly less desirable destinations, taking serious risks against their lives? When the Oromo country is largely conducive for agricultural development, rain-fed or irrigation-based, it produces over 60%, by some estimates, of the country's GDP and contributes well over 75%. I think I have 80% here, in that range anyway. It contributes that much to the country's export earnings, and the Oromo country has a population base that can be harnessed for economic development. And of course, the Oromo people have a reasonably inclusive socio-political and value system that may be considered useful for development. Obviously, I'm not the first person to ponder these questions, nor will I be the last to offer insights that could explain the disconnection, the contradiction, if you will. The simple answer is the Ethiopian state has kept the Oromo from reaching their productive potentials, and it won't serve their economic interests unless it is decolonized. I'll come to the formula that I offer my arguments in some fashion, in some order. Why do I say Ethiopia won't serve the economic interests of the Oromo people? It is essentially because it's a deeply ethnically polarized state, not a mosaic of ethnic diversity as held by the Romanticists. The romantic view of Ethiopia is that it is this great nation, ancient nation, exceptional nation, and it's different ethnic groups.
This meeting is being recorded.
Is that it is a deeply ethnically polarized state, and that's the main reason. why it is incompatible, or why I argue it is incompatible with development. And of course, we need to distinguish between these ideas: ethnic diversity, ethnic fractionalization even, and ethnic polarization. Without getting into them, let's just sort of distinguish between ethnic diversity and ethnic polarization. Generally speaking, ethnic diversity is considered good for economic development. On the contrary, ethnic polarization is terrible for development. This is what some of us study, quantify even. And there are two main reasons for why ethnic polarization is terrible for development. Two main reasons. The first one is that ethnically polarized societies are constantly engaged in economically devastating conflicts and wars, as we see in Ethiopia. The other channel is that ethnically polarized states such as Ethiopia are highly prone to competitive rent seeking and corruption, which is not good for development. Let's sort of get a little more into the conflict channel with respect to Ethiopia. Let's talk about this channel as it relates to Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a classic example of how or why ethnically polarized societies are constantly engaged in economically destructive wars. In a sense, and to a large extent, Ethiopia's devastating wars are outcomes of the severity of ethnic polarization in the country. It's not a function of ethnic federalism, nor is it hoisted upon the country. I mean, the wars are not hoisted upon the country by overly hedonistic ethnic lords, as some people have argued. But the main reason that Ethiopia is constantly at wars is because it is ethnically polarized. In fact, there is no shortage of wannabe ethnic lords who are looking to stoke the fire for their own benefits, motivated by what political economists call vertical inequality, essentially greed. But that's not the main reason countries like Ethiopia are constantly fighting, are in conflict. The fundamental cause of conflicts in countries like Ethiopia is what economists call, as I said, horizontal inequality or grievance, social grievance. Historians have argued eloquently or convincingly that ethnic polarization is indeed baked into Ethiopia's political fabric. It wasn't invented by some of the famous political leaders that generally are mentioned with respect to why there is civil conflict in Ethiopia based on sort of ethnic affiliation. It wasn't invented by Meles Zenawi or even Lenjo Letta, but it is really deeply embedded in the country's sort of foundation. I try to explain in some of the pieces that I've authored in foreign policy and the Global Policy Journal recently in the last few years that indeed, okay, the grievance model explains the Ethiopian civil conflict better. Okay, this argument that Ethiopia is a prison of nations and nationalities, this has been with us for as long as I remember anyway. If indeed the romanticists argue, as they argue that hedonistic motivations were the root cause of the conflicts in Ethiopia, the insurgents in Tigray and Oromo would have already buckled under the onslaught from the Ethiopian Defense Forces, the Eritrean Defense Forces, and their allies. As we know, the facts on the ground suggest that the rebel forces have essentially fought these fearsome armies to a draw, albeit with with significant casualty. What I'm trying to say here is that the intensity of the Ethiopian civil conflict suggests, again, based on my readings of the literature on conflicts, there are deep-rooted grievances against the Ethiopian state by these major groups. It's not because somebody sort of misguides or is telling these youths or young people to sort of pick up arms and fight. There are deeper causes, is what I'm trying to argue here. As to the other channel, with respect to the other channel, why Ethiopia is incompatible with development and have kept the Oromo down is this argument that sort of comes out again from the literature in economic development, that ethnically polarized societies are prone to competitive rent seeking. And Ethiopia again stands out as a classic example for this argument. Well-connected firms and individuals accumulate an obscene amount of wealth without creating national wealth. It's not shared prosperity. I don't know how many if you guys know, or how many of you know that Ethiopia today is essentially an oligarchy of a few families. We can count them in our sort of, we can count them. We know who they are, and we sort of know how they accumulated the obscene amount of wealth that they have today. Okay, their wealth comes at the expense of the livelihood. Okay, the expansion of Finfinne, as we know, into the agricultural lands is an example here, or how some of these oligarchs operate in exploiting, in sort of using extractive institutions at the expense of the health of the people that sort of own these resources. The Shakiso gold mine and how it's exploited and how it has left the population behind is another example. Formula, just 1 minute. I have only 2 slides and I will end it, Asafa. What is the formula that can serve the economic interests of the Oromo going forward? Okay, what is the solution? We have outlined this I have outlined this in different writings, and we'll continue to hit this point. It is a confederation of viable, sovereign, and democratic nations in a manner of the EU is what we propose, what I propose here. And each word here is loaded, I know, but we will sort of have to explain what they mean realistically going forward. But for the time being, I'll just outline this as a solution, as a formula that could sort of help the Oromo. The formula, I'll say this, recognizes the essential diversity and, yes, similarity of Ethiopians. Ethiopians, through colonial relationships, yes, have built common institutions, and they can build their common future around these by tweaking them. What I am saying is we can take a lesson from the history of nations that currently constitute the EU, the European Union, who had fought wars, destructive wars for hundreds and hundreds of years, ethnic wars even. But then about 70 years ago, they sort of decided to form some sort of economic integration, and that has worked out very well for these nations that are now member states of the EU. And we don't have any wars that they're fighting now. Okay, no destructive wars have been fought between the member states of the European Union since the formation of after World War II, basically. And importantly, they have achieved price and income convergence for their member states as predicted by economic theory. In other words, they're enjoying the fruits of peace, stability, and economic growth made possible by their economic integration. The lesson here is that these experiences, there are experiences for the nations that currently constitute the unhappy and unequal union called Ethiopia. And thank you for listening. Yeah.